Welcome to Stars Matter, a recruiting podcast from The Athletic. I'm Mitch Light, joined by Ari Wsserman. And Ari, today we've got a very is it a very special edition or just a special edition? I guess we can determine.
It's a very special edition.
Very special edition.
Because
we're joined by David Ubben,
the star of the show, really.
Yes. David, are you a senior writer? Is that your title? I don't even know.
It is.
Senior writer.
That means I have some grays in the hair. So
yeah senior, not quite as many as me. Senior writer for The Athletic. And we are here today to talk about a story that is on The Athletic. And David, I'm going to turn it over to you because this was your idea. You came to Ari, then to me. Big research project. We had a lot of fun doing it. Took some time off of Ari's life, but he survived doing research.
Can't do research.
We all aged doing this.
We all have our strengths and weaknesses.
Research is research. Looking at my calendar, looking at my email, and typos are my
Slack.
My four bugaboos. You know.
Yeah. Well, David, first of all, thanks for joining us, even though you're one of the hosts of the podcast today. But take it away. Tell us where this idea came from and what it is.
So I was talking to a Power 5 head coach who was just talking about recruiting, and he was kind of like, you get to the end of the NFL draft, and everyone will say, oh, Georgia's got 16 picks, Alabama's got 117 picks, and the SEC has 900 picks this year. Everybody wants to talk about all these numbers. He's like, but obviously if you recruit the highest percentage of guys, like 5 stars, high 4 stars, you're going to have the most draft picks. He's like, nobody ever talks about the percentages that if I'm a 5-star kid or I'm a 4-star kid and one program has 70 of 4 or 5 stars on their roster and 8 of those guys get drafted and one other school has 6 of those guys on their roster and 5 of those guys get drafted, where's the best school to go? Well, if you look by total numbers, people are going to talk about the big numbers and they have more draft picks and all this stuff, but nobody ever talks about percentages. And I thought, it's actually a fair point. It's a good point. I'd be curious to know, where is the best place to go if you're a 5-star, if you're a 4-star, if you're a 3-star? So I embarked on this project of I'm going to chart every school's 5 stars, 4 stars, and 3 stars. How many did you sign and how many did you have that got drafted? I got about 4 schools in, and it had been about 2 days. And
you got to tell them, Dave, that
I'm
you
gonna
called
die
me with the idea.
Yes.
And you said, I'm going to do this. And I was like, that is awesome. That is going to be awful. And you were just like, yeah, I think I can handle it. And then the next morning, he's like, I can't do this shit by myself.
That's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
So I was like, we got to, because it was basically data entry. It was brutal because we're simply going back to all 65 Power 5 schools just for our own sanity and time constraints. Taking those classes, we took the 2009 up until the 2019 classes because most of those guys have been drafted now. There are a few stragglers with COVID year, but it's not perfect. And so we'd have draft data from 2012 to 2022, compared those on top of each other. And so I just went back. How many 4 stars did you sign? How many 3 stars? How many 5 stars? And then looked at for all 10 classes. And we found some very interesting things, fellas. That's basically what the project is. And I thought we'd be in for some surprises, and we were.
Yeah. To answer your question, David, I mean, my takeaway, and I think all of our takeaways is if you're a good player, you're probably going to be drafted. I mean, there's just really, in the reason Alabama, Georgia, and all those schools have the most players drafted is because they sign the best players. And we're going to go into this, and the story got into this, and the elite programs do very well in our 3-star projections, because they are signing, and there's a lot of 3 stars out there, anywhere from 450 in the country all the way to 16 or 1700. So Alabama, Ohio State,
find you.
They are signing for the most part 3 stars in that 5, 6, 700 range, where a program like Iowa State, a developmental program, is signing them in the 7, 8, 9, in the thousands. So obviously, there's these rankings aren't perfect, but those players in the 5, 6, 700s are better players. They're more likely to be drafted. So,
well, this is kind of too been in the back of both of our heads, I think, as we've edited stories and written them together, Mitch. And I think that you agree that as you come to look at the 4, 5, and 3-star data, that 247 and all the ranking services, who do a great job, I'm not coming down on them, but I think they categorize players. Like if you are a 3-star prospect who ranks number 454 in the country, you are not the same as the 3-star prospect who ranks 2100. So I think that it's interesting that 2-star, and we found a lot of 2-stars, like more than we actually like remember during the process. But the fact that 2-stars and 1-stars aren't utilized the same in the same proportion. And maybe 1-star is just like if you get a scholarship anywhere, you're a 1-star.
Yeah, if you have an
But
offer from an FBS program, you're a 1-star. You're
yeah,
being
but I
automatic.
think it would be more accurate if more 2-star prospects got like it was normal for a Power 5 program to sign a 2-star, because it should be 5-star prospects should be what it is, right? Like
Right.
1 to 35 ish. And then 4-star, I think you could go from like 45 to 300. Then I think 3-star should go from 300 to 800 or 900.
Or even
2-star
1,000 if
from
you want a clean break.
1,000
Yeah.
to 1,700, and then 1-star. If you're outside of the top 1,700, you're a 1-star.
Yeah.
That would like really clean it up, because I do think that to me, why don't you, Mitch, go through and tell the people who are listening, if they haven't read the story yet, who the best programs were for 5, 4, and 3-stars, and the worst, and then we'll go into the numbers
Okay.
more.
Before we move on from that point, I did do, because I've been so intrigued by this high volume of 3-stars, I looked it up. Alabama, the average ranking of Alabama's 3-star signees during this time frame.
Can I guess?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I slacked it to you, but you probably didn't read it.
I haven't read it yet.
I'll take 475. 475.
Okay.
That would be like roughly where I'm at. 474 to do the Price is Right thing.
Okay, it's
think
592. It's 592,
Okay.
and Alabama had some flyers on some guys in the thousands that other.
And let's not
programs
forget the
didn't.
kickers and punters.
Did you rank the kickers and punters in that same? Were they
No,
part of your average?
There was a 1 or 2. Most of the kickers and punters, a lot of them are 2-stars, and that's another thing we need to back up. This project does not, and David, you might have said this at the very beginning. Sorry if I missed it. This project does not include 2-stars. It's 3, 4, and 5.
Yes.
So if we're talking about your favorite team and the numbers are slightly off from research that you're going to go in and do to prove us wrong, we looked up a lot of stuff. There's bound to be a number wrong here or there, but we did not include 2-stars and no stars. But to put that in context, Alabama's average 3-star was 592 over the stretch. In the 2023 cycle, 6 Power 5 teams didn't sign a single top 600 recruit.
Mm-hmm.
So like the average of Alabama's like worst recruits over the stretch, it's still better than some schools are signing.
And now that we have this raw data, I think it can open up a lot more avenues. I think the next step would be, and I don't know if I could look this up in the next month, I got to recover. But like, I like your idea, and I generally agree with your guys' premise. Before we even look this stuff up, that if you're a 5-star prospect, it doesn't generally matter where you end up for college, you're going to get drafted.
Yeah, I think that was
I have.
That was like a central idea of this whole thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but go ahead.
But
Ari.
the other thing, too,
Ari.
is that there is a big difference between being a first-round pick and a 6th-round pick. So
Yes.
if you go to Alabama, you might have had – Alabama might not have been the team that sent the most percentage or the highest percentage of 5-stars into the draft. But I wonder if the draft positioning of those players was generally higher than other places. I'd probably wager that they are. But I think so like if you're going to try to poke holes in certain things, there are a lot of different ways to do that. But I think from a general standpoint, this is a very good litmus test of if you are a high school kid and you get drafted, you are a success, regardless of where you got drafted.
Yeah.
And which programs did the best and the worst of taking your rating, your caliber of player, and producing them into a draft pick, I think is a very large piece of the puzzle of what that Power 5 coach was talking to you about.
You know what?
I think the core of it is like, it's the idea that if you're a 4 or 5-star, well, if you want to maximize your ability to go to the draft, you got to go to Alabama. You got to go to Georgia. You got to go to Ohio State. You got to go to LSU. You got to go to Clemson, all these places. That's sort of what we're going after. And I think the data says you don't really. Or that the idea that, oh, you got to play in the SEC if you're an elite guy because the NFL teams, that's what they really care about. And the data across the board, other than 3-stars, which for reasons that we always talk about with Alabama and LSU and some of the schools saying high 3-stars, they did well in the 3-star. The SEC, no appreciable difference, and they finished, I think, second and third in 5-star and 4-star percentage. So I think that central thesis that I think a lot of people just hold as a truth in college football, I think the data really disproves.
So
Also, too, kids make their decision under the assumption that it does.
yeah, it's a
Yes,
self-fulfilling
100%.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'm going to
Yes.
go into the data in 1 second, and it's really hard not to get caught on tangents because we're really excited about this. But one guy that, to Ari's point about where you're selecting the draft, that like totally throws everything else. Like Trey Smith goes to Tennessee as a 5-star, has a great career, had some medical issues, almost isn't drafted, 6th round, and he starts as a rookie. So like that's
And
just
wins a
one
Super Bowl.
yeah, and wins a Super Bowl. So that's one kid's like, well, yeah, he was a 5-star. He's a starter in the NFL. Surely he was a top first-round draft pick. No, he was 6th round. So there's a lot of examples like
First
that.
or
But
second round
also, too,
talent.
though, the fact of the matter is that he's a 5-star prospect, and his physical traits that allowed him to become that are the
Yes.
reason why a team would take a flyer under those circumstances, too.
Yes,
It's
that's
like if you're a
true.
3-star prospect with general, solid measurables, then you would fall out of the draft. If you're a 5-star, you don't because of that physical ability. And I heard you guys talking before I got on, just in the back room here about what makes a 5-star prospect. And it's just like, that's the thing that is the truth. You have to be physically built and physically capable of doing things that your peers cannot do. And that transcends what colors you wear on Saturday. Like if you are that type of person, that you're going to get drafted anyway because nobody is doing what you can do.
And I'm sure listeners have been around. Some of them have, some of them have not. If you have never interacted on a person-to-person basis with like a 5-star lineman, like I really can't tell you just how they're just giant people. And most of the time they're proportional, but they're just like every limb of your body is like just it's hard to describe how big those people are. We call them the get off the bus all stars, and Trey's a good example of that. I'm gonna say Gerald McCoy back in the day. I covered
Here's a
him
guy
a
you
million
cover.
years ago.
David, here's
No.
a guy you cover, and I've talked about this in the pod. In my 7 years of doing sideline radio for Vanderbilt, that was a great seat. I'm literally on the sideline watching these guys. Derek Barnett and A.J. Brown. Was A.J. Brown a 5-star? I don't know if he was.
I don't believe so. I believe he's a 4-star. Ole Miss had
Okay.
a lot of 5-stars.
Yeah.
They did
A.J.
quite well.
Brown and Derek Barnett were the two of the most impressive that you just look at them and be like, that's a different type of human being. And partly
So you
because like a wide receiver, I had the best view of a wide receiver. They would line up like right in front of me, and Derek Barnett on the edge. So there's countless guys like that, but those are two guys I'll never forget.
You know which one that I'll never forget, guys? When Chase.
Yes, I've heard
Chase
you talk about
Young
him.
came to Ohio State on his official visit. We're talking about a 6'6" giant that had biceps the size of my thigh muscles and a 6-pack. Like
Basically,
I've never
slightly
seen
better in shape Bill Landis, right?
I've never seen a human being that big, shaped, so chiseled. And then you like, oh, he's one of the best young defensive linemen in the NFL. Who anybody could just look at this human being and know this was going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
to me,
that's
I think the 5-stars.
Okay,
the 5-stars. The
it's
5-stars are the guys
yes.
that you don't need to be a draft or a recruiting analyst to point out.
Okay,
it's hard to screw up, but the data says it's easier than you'd think to screw up.
Yeah. So David, let me be sure I get this right. For our charts that you see in the story, for 5-star, it was a minimum of 5 signed, which seems a little low, but there's
only so many.
When a few of the schools are signing a bunch, there wouldn't be enough schools to qualify. So these schools did not qualify, but 5 schools who signed more than 1 5-star batted 1,000. It was Arizona, Mississippi State, both were 3 for 3. And Washington, Virginia Tech, and Kansas State went 2 for 2. And again, before I dive into the numbers, David, we've got one more tangent. Why don't you talk about the way we handled transfers, which weren't very prevalent until recent. This rash of transfers we're seeing in the past few years does not factor in this. It's after. But how did we handle transfers? Why don't you explain?
So we had a lot of discussion about this because there's no clean way to do it. So the way that we decided was, hey, a kid signs with you. If his next step is not into the NFL draft, he does not count as a draft pick for your school. Now, that gets into the two examples, the high profile examples that we will talk about is like, okay, Jalen Hurts obviously had established himself as a very good player. He was not a 5-star, but he obviously had established himself as a very good player, and then transferred to Oklahoma, where he had another good year, became a draft pick, doing quite well in the NFL. So that's sort of complicated, all right? Because who should get credit for him? If you want to say, well, Alabama should get credit, okay, but like at some point we have to just say this is how it's going to be. And so, but then when you get into situations like Justin Fields or Joe Burrow, LSU obviously should get credit for Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow did nothing at Ohio State. They shouldn't get credit for developing him, all that stuff. Justin Fields, same thing. They didn't let him do a whole lot at Georgia. Ohio State should get credit for developing him. They do in this project. So that's just how we did it. Yeah, we can't go through and make a judgment call on every single transfer. So if you signed a 5-star and he eventually transfers away, then you have one 5-star that you did not turn into a draft pick, even if later in his career he became a draft pick. Just so that we're clear.
Good.
You can yell
Also,
at us
Mitch,
if you like, but that's just we have to do it consistently.
You said Arizona when you were talking. I want to be clear that
State.
that was Arizona State.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. So I had it written down correctly. I misspoke. So
2 transfers in there, by the way. Jack Jones and Christian Wsserman from Auburn.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so 5-star U ended up being Stanford. Now, a low number, 5 drafted, 6 signed, and we're not going to go over everyone for every school, but I did just look this up. The 6 5-stars signed were 3 of them in the 2017 class. Foster Sarrell, offensive tackle, Walker Little, offensive tackle, and Davis Mills, quarterback, were in the 17 class. Then you had Solomon Thomas, defensive end, in 14, and then Kyle Murphy, offensive tackle, and Andrus Pete, offensive tackle. So basically it's offensive tackle U. The one Stanford 5-star who was not drafted was Foster Sarrell, who was in the NFL, was on the Chargers this year, played in 5 games. So
if I recall, didn't the Stanford have to fight off basically the entire SEC for Andrus Pete?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't remember his recruitment. That's when Stanford.
I remember it was pretty heated, but I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, that's when it was. They were like offensive tackle U. They were line of scrimmage U. They were getting some guys on the defensive line too. Number 2 is Clemson, 12 of 16, and that's a pretty good volume. That's in that next tier of the non-Alabama Georgia range. So 75%. Texas A&M, 8 of 11 at 72.7%. I'll just read a few more.
We need a Warham drop there after the A&M announcement.
Yeah. And then and you can follow along if you got the story here on the charts. We've got these charts in there. Miami, the U, 5 of 7, 71.4%. And then Alabama.
Is it this? Is it 2 fingers or 1?
Well, Mike Zimmerman, our producer, needs to,
what are you doing over there? Yeah,
the expert.
I don't know. No, it's the full hand, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Full hand. My bad. My bad. That's on me.
Stick to the SEC, buddy. Okay. And then
I need a turnover chain.
Alabama, number 1 in 5 stars, drafted with 30, number 1 in 5 stars, signed with 44, and they 68.2% of Alabama's 5 stars were drafted.
Let me be the first to say this.
Okay.
It's my honor.
It's not going to be I feel confident.
Stars matter?
Either Ari truly will be the first person to say this or the 500th. I'm excited to hear this.
Probably the 500th.
It's like when you listen to local sports talk and a guy calls in.
Man.
Go ahead.
44 signees, 30 out of 44 Alabama, right?
Yes, correct.
5 stars.
Is a different ball game than 6 out of 5. So like Stanford right now,
you can't have 6 out of
5 out of 6.
We know. We had to have a cutoff though.
The cutoff was necessary, but to get 68.2% into the NFL when you sign 44, that's more than double than the 4 teams ahead of them. So like there is context that needs to be applied to this conversation.
Sure.
Because
but that's sort of the whole question is if one school has 6 and gets 5. Well, if you took half of Bama's 5 stars and those guys could get into Stanford and went to Stanford, would they still have the similar amount of success? I think probably yes, right? That's sort of the question that we sort of.
That's what the data suggests.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Alabama deserves the credit, obviously, for getting them and producing them
at
a great rate. But it's the data shows that, you can go to a lot of places, which we suspected.
Yeah. It would be interesting to be able to do like a simulator, like a Madden simulator of this and kind of change the direction of the schools because
I believe that's the theory of relativity or like alternate universes. So we could have a physics breakout
and send them to 3 schools and see how they develop.
Now we're talking.
That there is some question as to whether or not you can just extrapolate out from 6 to 44 and think that the pattern would maintain. Like there has to be some sort of there's a limb to jump there.
Right. We're not saying it's the same percent. We're just it's just you don't have to go to one of those schools to get
And I
drafted.
think too, there's a lot of places that signed 5 or 6. There's not very many that signed 44. It's like Bama,
Yeah.
Ohio. There's like 3 to 5 schools that get that volume. So
Well,
then
this
the
too
question is
also
sort of
was
like,
the thing that stood out to me was that they signed 44 and Georgia signed 34 and Ohio State signed 23. So like Alabama legitimately almost signed over a 10-year period double the 5 stars that Ohio State did. So if you're trying to figure out like
I believe they also
why
have
they
double
were
the
so
national
good,
titles. Am I wrong?
yeah, I think that there might be a correlation between those two things.
Maybe.
But also Florida State with 27 blew me away.
Yeah.
Well, this is
Shout out to
early.
Jimbo.
Yeah, early in
Yeah.
this. Okay, guys, it's time to look at the
The
other end of the
worst.
spectrum. And this will not be a surprise. Ari, I hate to tell you, Texas not back, or they weren't back at any time.
But I did, Dave, tell you, did I say before you add this up, Dave, you're going to get a Texas surprise in here. But before we even got the numbers, I told them that this was going to happen.
Four
It's
of
true,
the
but
17,
number 2 I was floored with.
Yeah, the 4 of the 17 5-stars that Texas signed for 23.5% is the worst among qualifiers. And it's not good. Oklahoma was second at 3 out of 12, only 25%. A few more, and then we'll dive into these. Auburn at 4 out of 13. Next, Tennessee, 4 out of 10. Notre Dame, 3 out of 7, 42.9%. But when you're in a number like Notre Dame, one player, makes a huge difference in your percentages there. So
it's very interesting that Oklahoma has had so much success with 4-star draftees. They are just outside the top 10 in 4-star, and yet the worst or second worst in 5-star. They just have had bad luck with big time guys. Brandon Williams, Keith Ford. They inherited Kyler,
right.
turned him, so
So
that's
he
one
counts.
that counted for them. But I'm forgetting some. Bray Walker is the most recent example for them that just has not turned out great for them. They've Jeremy Calhoun. They've had some just rough runs with the 5-star guys where it just has not worked out.
Well, you can't call it bad luck and then rip on Texas either, too. It's like it's
I wouldn't call it luck. It's just a matter of, hey, and that's over 2 coaches. That's part of the Stoops era, and that's part of the Lincoln Riley era.
Ari, go ahead in just a second, but I do want to stress, we keep saying this, especially for the 5-star. I think the data for the 3 and 4-star, the numbers are enough that they mean more. Like, not saying these numbers don't mean, but when you've got these low numbers, a few players here or there really changes your percentage. So kind of keep that with a little bit of grain of salt with the 5-stars. But go ahead.
Yeah,
Ari.
and we'll get more context too, like as we go on into the 3 and 4 stars. But like we always joke, or I do with Andy, of like, I look at Texas and I look at what they're bringing in, and I go, why the hell can that team not win regular Big 12 games? Like regular season games. And it's just like, well, what is the problem? Is it the coaching? Is it it's just
it's
an
not one thing.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we pointed to was, Jonathan Gray and Jackson Jeffcoat are the 2 biggest standouts. Jonathan Gray, I mean, maybe the best high school running back. Him and Derrick Henry are probably on the short list of 2 of the best high school running backs probably ever. Jackson Jeffcoat, very good player. His dad played in the league for a long time, has gone into coaching. Both those guys, they had injuries. A lot of stuff happened to them, but they were still functional players. Did not get drafted. And that's somewhat hard to believe. I mean, Jackson Jeffcoat especially, he looked dominant at times. I believe he won the Ted Hendricks Award.
He's the 4th highest rated recruit in Texas history.
Which is saying
modern history. Yeah.
And, those guys just did not get drafted. I think Texas, considering how much talent they've had and considering the modest amount of success, and Sam Ellinger's premature proclamation of we're back, Sark's got his work cut out for him. That's where it starts. Like funny. Getting elite guys and making them great players.
Like if the Manning family would have gotten this spreadsheet before they made a commitment, it's a new coach, so you can't, 10 years. This data is before Sark, right?
Yes.
Or like the very first year, maybe there's 1 year of overlap, but like,
if you want to count, the 22 draft. Yeah. So
the lack of ability of taking the 5-star talent and at least squeezing enough out, because like, honestly, if you're a 5-star prospect and you get drafted in the 6th or 7th round, something went wrong.
Yes.
Like that to me is like not getting drafted at all is like a real blunder. So,
and a lot of times when that has happened, it's because of off the field stuff. Trey McGuire at Oklahoma was a very famous instance of that. We kind of referenced Thomas Johnson at Texas A&M. Even though Texas A&M had some real success, some off the field issues, to say the least there. And
I
so we see that a lot with 5 stars.
I would like to look at the 5 stars who did not have any sort of injury, no off the field, and
Yeah.
weren't drafted. That would
I
be
bet you it's very low.
I
Yeah,
bet you it is too.
yeah, so that'd be interesting. So, all right, guys, there's so much we can talk about, but I think we probably need to move on to 4 stars because we still
Okay.
have,
And this is where I think when we're talking about development, I actually think 4 stars is like the truest test of
I agree.
can you take a very promising piece and turn it into something? Because 5 stars, it's a matter of don't screw this up. Like this guy's special.
Yeah.
3 stars, I actually think is more about evaluation and fit than pure development. Yes, there's a development aspect to it, but I think 4 star is the purest development because I think 4 stars can fit in a lot of places. 3 stars, I think you have to find a guy that fits.
I think
what
you should
do.
add that point in
Mm-hmm.
to the written product because we are,
Maybe I
spoiler
will.
alert, recording this before it went up.
Ari,
So
you're giving it all
yeah.
away.
No, I just like that's I didn't think of it that way, Dave, and
I
I think
know.
that's absolutely right.
Yeah. No,
Yes.
and Ari and I have talked about this a lot, and it's so again, we always compliment the recruiting services. They do a really good job, but it is really
do.
difficult to tell the difference between the 592 guy and the 720 guy. And that's
Mhm.
why programs like Wake Forest are good because Dave Clawson and his staff have identified the guys that fit their system.
And that's why
And-
they're proportionally being paid a lot more than
Right,
people
right.
who rank them too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so,
that's
so
So, Mitch, give us our number 1 4-star U.
4-star
Come on,
U
come on.
from Waco, Texas, Baylor, 11 4-stars drafted, 29 signed for a 37.9%. Now, of the top 10 teams that what was our 4-star U cutoff, David? It was 20, right?
20 total
Signed.
signees. That's 2 per year ish.
Yeah, so Baylor, not at the border, but they were close. So there's a lot of teams on this list that are that signed much higher.
And I think Baylor is a very interesting case because a lot of these schools, the ones that thrived, Alabama, obviously there you look at our 5-star U, Penn State, Ohio State, in their Clemson, the places that have done well have had coaching continuity. Like that's a pretty decent amount of layover. Baylor has not. Baylor has had 3 coaches over the span that we looked at. And now the note is that all 3 of those coaches, none of them left because of on-field performance. Obviously, the Art Browse situation at Baylor, that's been well chronicled. Matt Rule rises them from a real messy situation. Goes from 1 win to the Sugar Bowl in 3 years, goes to the Panthers. Now he's back at Nebraska, obviously. And now Dave Aranda. So you have 3 coaches. By the time that our data started was right at the start of Baylor's rise. I think 2009 would have been RG3's freshman year, I believe. So you're sort of at the start of the Baylor sort of revival. And then now you're sort of, at the back end where Aranda has it going and he's got it going. But for them to do this and have this sort of success over the course of 3 coaches, I think is even more impressive because there's so many variables that come into that. And then you have transfers and guys leaving and all that stuff. With all that turnover, Baylor, it didn't matter.
Here's another program that has not had coaching stability. Miami is second, and they have a high volume. Baylor, remember, keep in mind, Baylor signed 29. I'm looking at my data, so I couldn't see you on the screen. Miami had 31 of 88 for 35.2%. LSU, 48 of 142 drafted, 33.8. Ohio State, 49 of 149 at 32.9. And then Alabama was next at 30.6%. And then Notre Dame, NC State, Georgia, Clemson, and Utah. Utah is one that I think we would probably suspect would be on this list. Now, they're only at 27.6%, but yes, definitely staff continuity there. Ari, you are always quick to point out and credit Dabo Swinney for being such a great evaluator. They show up on the 5-star U and they show up on 4-star U. We'll get to 3-star U, but no surprise to see Clemson on here.
Yeah, it's also like no surprise to see that Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia are reflected on both these first 2 lists that we do. And it's interesting because, on one hand, when you say if a 5-star prospect goes anywhere, he'll get drafted, kind of takes away the credit from the big time programs. But as you go down these lists, you also can see that those big time programs, and again, the same thing is true about 3 stars and with 4 stars. There's a 4-star prospect who's ranked number 50 is not the same as a 4-star that's ranked 299.
Mhm.
But the development from the big time schools is consistent from 5, 4, and then eventually we'll see at 3 too. So like seeing Clemson and their ability to do this is like one of the least surprising things. And honestly speaking, I think the most interesting thing about this whole thing is how successful Miami has been in creating draft picks out of their 4-star prospects, but not having a very good football team. Because for the most part, you could look at this list and say, Baylor's had great teams.
Mhm.
Miami hasn't been very good for the last decade, but LSU won a national championship. Ohio State won a national championship. Alabama won one. Notre Dame made it to the playoff twice. Georgia was back-to-back champions. Clemson has 2. Utah's won the Pac-12 a few times. Like all of these teams that have done a good job of developing their 4-star prospects have also translated that into good football teams. So like for Miami to be number 2 on this list, but also have a bad team during that part, I was kind of one of the more surprising ones that like in the entire data that we found. I thought Miami here was weird.
Mitch,
Yes.
I gotta introduce the worst 4-star you.
This one is
Because
I
here's
did
the
okay, I
if
did
you
all
were
these
just
charts. I've seen all these numbers. Been looking at them for 2 weeks. I didn't realize how bad this team
it's
was in
bad.
at
I
4-star year.
I'll let our listeners who have not seen the story, I'll give you a moment to guess, because if you were just pulling names out of a hat, you would not guess this in a billion gazillion
And
years.
they did
But
not
when
come close to just qualifying. They are
yes,
well over the number. This is not a sample size
but when I
thing with
say
old
it, you'll
math.
say, "Oh yeah."
Yeah.
In a league of their own, less than half the percentage of anyone else. Like, we did all this data. They are incredibly bad. Give
Okay,
it up.
out of the 6 categories, 3, 4, 5-star, top and bottom, this one is
The widest gap.
the
It's not
widest
even
gap. Yeah.
close. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Congratulations to the Nebraska Cornhuskers.
3, they signed 67 4-stars. 3 of them were drafted.
I don't even know how that's possible.
We could put
Mitch.
us
That
3 on the
is
staff. Ari's offensive coordinator. I'm special teams. Dave, you're defensive coordinator. We're going to get more than 3 drafted.
I'm not
That
trying
is,
to
like,
help save
wild.
this program from the humiliation that it probably deserves. I wonder how many 4-star prospects Nebraska has signed that got drafted from another school.
Not a ton,
Wandale
because they've had
because the recent transfer, it's just recent.
Yeah, because they've had a lot of people leave.
Their
But here's
two
the
highest
thing.
rated. Their 2 highest rated 4-stars. Aaron Green finished at TCU. Tyjon Lindsey ended up at Oregon State. Wandale Robinson went to Kentucky. Had a really nice year. Got drafted. There's probably some more. We have some names that have stood out, but
It wouldn't
that's
have
a good
helped them
question,
get
Ari.
off this list. But the
They'd
question,
still be last or first,
well,
whatever we want to
Mitch,
say.
and here's the thing with Nebraska that I think is interesting, because and this has to get added too, I think. We talk about all the time. Well, Nebraska signs top 25 classes every year. How come they're so bad? It's like, A, it's development, but 2, Nebraska might just be the worst evaluating team for their system that they could like.
Well, they were under the last staff, yeah.
Well, when
under
you
the
have
last
when you have
staff,
turnover like that, you can't evaluate to your system, because then your system
There is
changes.
no
This is
system.
one of the reasons
Yeah.
why continuity is a major plus in this.
Here, okay. Tennessee is second. Not a surprise. Lack of continuity.
Tons of
They've
talent at Tennessee.
flat and
Struggles on the
flashy,
field.
right? Flashy recruiting classes, off the field drama, guys leaving. That's stabilized last couple of years. So Tennessee, out of 105 draft picks, they only had 105 4-stars signed. They only had 10 drafted. This next one's a little bit of a surprise. Ari, you can speak to this. This is your old neck of the woods. Michigan State, third at
Would
just
not have guessed that.
9.6%. 5.
I would have
of
guessed the
52.
opposite.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot. That's the thing. So much of this data just challenges perception, and like this is one of the reasons why I like this project, is because I think we all 3 went into this with the purest of hearts. I'm curious. I don't know what the answer to this is. I think we all suspected that the idea that we have our nose pressed up against the glass.
We should have guessed before we did this. We should have guessed.
Yeah, we should have. We have our nose, but we know. Hey, if Derrick Henry had gone to Purdue, he's probably still going to be a freak. Like that just is what it is. So that was sort of the one thing that I think we all sort of walked into this with some preconceived notions. And the big schools still, obviously, we've talked about, have done really well. But you just don't know. People think of Michigan State. Oh, Mark D'Antoni, he gets the most out of these guys. And in wins, you're probably right. They've had a lot of success. They've gotten to the playoff. Has not translated to pro success. Mel Tucker, just finished up his second year. Probably too soon. This is mostly a D'Antonio situation that we're looking at, but very surprising.
Yes. Fourth on this list is a school we've talked a lot about, Texas. 146 4-stars. That is 41 more than anyone else on this list. Only 17 drafted, 11.6%. Then rounding out our top 10 for worst 4-star producers of draft picks is Rutgers, Texas A&M, Oregon, a little bit of a surprise here, TCU, Maryland, and Missouri. So
I have no answer for you for why Texas A&M can be so good at developing 5-stars and so bad at. That's one of the most interesting things of this data.
I think I'll go 5-star, a little bit small numbers, sample size there,
Smaller sample size, freakier athlete. But yeah, I don't know. It is strange. You would think that if you'd be good at one, you'd be good at all.
I do think too. We talked about, hey, if you have a 5-star, and this is a credit to A&M. If you have a 5-star and he becomes a 6th rounder, something goes wrong. But it's not that easy to take an elite recruit, a 5-star kid, a top 10 kid, and turn them into a 1st rounder. That's harder than I think people think. And Myles Garrett is sort of the poster child. I believe he was the number 1 overall recruit, maybe number 2 in his class. Becomes the number 1 overall pick. That is a credit to Kevin Sumlin and their staff at that time. That's not the easiest thing in the world to do.
No doubt.
Props to them. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, injuries, all those things. But to convert a guy from top overall recruit to top overall draft pick, that line is not always straight.
Yes.
Yeah, but seeing Texas on both bottom lists, it's like crystallizes the dysfunction. Yeah.
All right, we're going to go over 3 stars now, top and bottom, and then we'll have some time for some kind of takeaways. We'll just round table, bounce around. But Ari, I would like you to introduce. You might not have the numbers in front of you, but I'll let you introduce 3-star U. They've had 68 3-stars signed. They had 14 drafted. It's a school that you're very familiar with. Tell us who it is, Ari.
And before this, we did some predictions. I told you guys 3-star U is going to be one
props
of them.
Props to you, Ari. You had this.
3-star U is going to be one of the national championship winners contenders. And Ohio State is 3-star U. 68 3-star signed, 14 drafted, 20.6%. And then guess who follows them? LSU. 103 signed, 21 drafted, 20.4%. And then third is Alabama, 65 signed, 13 drafted, 20%. Florida next, 113, 21, 18.6%. Oklahoma rounds out the top 5, 135 signed, 25 drafted, 18.5%. Then you also have Arkansas, Penn State, Florida State, Stanford, and Wisconsin on this list. So, like Mitch said at the beginning of this, a lot of this has to do with the fact that the caliber of 3-star prospects signed by the places like Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama and all these are much higher caliber than, the 3 stars that are signed. And also, too, the thing that I don't know if we said this, but, it's important to just say it's simple math. But the more of a prospect you sign in total numbers, the harder it is to maintain a higher percentage. It's easier to get to 50% from 10 than it is from 200. But still, it's just like kind of like the entire notion of like as obvious or as interesting as it might seem that anybody can get drafted from anywhere if they're a 5-star prospect. The notion that these programs that are winning national championships don't develop or recruit as well as, some of the middle tier programs that overachieve their recruiting rankings on a given year is also a misnomer. So, like that to me was the least surprising thing ever. If anybody watched the national championship game this past year, Georgia, the big bad wolf that was playing TCU, the lovable underdog, had 3 stars making it rain all over the field that entire game.
Jordan Davis 2 years ago, 3-star.
Lad McConkey, they had guys out there that were 3-star prospects that were really, really good. So the one thing too, I want to add before I kick it to you guys is, like we said, 2-star prospects weren't taken into account here. So just because you're not 3-star U doesn't mean that you don't do a good job of developing. And I want to use Wisconsin as a example because I added up the Big Ten. Wisconsin had, I think, like 12 2-stars drafted, which is one of the more remarkable things.
It can be our unofficial 2-star U because we didn't calculate the data, but I don't remember seeing anybody even close to that.
Yeah,
I don't remember seeing anybody
Wisconsin
with more than
did
3 or 5, 3, 4 or 5.
And maybe we should make a note of that too. But like, it's just, to me, of anything that I saw on this list that blew me away as impressive, like that to me is as impressive as anything that anyone else did. And that doesn't get accounted for in the numbers that we calculated. So I just wanted to make sure. Actually, Wisconsin's also one of the top 10 3-star U's too. So there is
high
a
volume.
correlation between those things.
186, they had the most on this of all the
Yeah.
top 10. They had the most.
And as you go down, like stature, like as you go down from Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and those teams, like, and you start getting into the TCUs and the Wisconsins, those teams have signed maybe double or triple as many 3-star prospects over the course of the past 10 years than the teams that are signing 5 stars because their entire classes are 3 stars.
Literally,
Whereas,
Wisconsin has signed 3 times as many 5 stars as Alabama. I mean,
yeah,
3
and it's
stars,
because that's
excuse
their
me, yeah.
entire class. Their entire classes are 3 stars. So, the fact that they are able to produce is huge. So, yeah, but here we are again. Looking at some really interesting numbers here, and
Let me butt in here,
do the
Ari.
bottom.
Well, no, real quick. There's one program we have not mentioned at all. I mean, you mentioned him casually in passing here, but on any of the previous lists, Florida makes a guest appearance, a program that has not had great stability. They are number 4 on the 3-star U at 18.6%. So good to see the Gators make a guest appearance.
Florida does not recruit at the elite level that I think some people
Definitely not.
that they do. They did during the Urban era, sort of, toward the end there. But Florida, does not, they have not been quite as dominant as people think. 18 5-star signees over the course that we looked at. That's fewer than LSU. That's only 5 more than Auburn. That's half as many, basically, as Georgia at 34. Quite a bit less than Alabama. They've recruited fine, but they're not. But like Florida, has not been.
Their 2010 class, I think, had 5 5-star prospects in it. So,
but you know what Napier's turning into, Ari, and we've talked about this on Stars Matter. They're almost like 4-star U now. Like their class last year lacked the elite top 50 guys, but their blue chip ratio was outstanding. Off the top of my head, it might have been like 18 of 21. I think they're off to another good start this year. So
they got a ton of guys ranked below 200, and I kind of feel for Florida because, like, it's like, oh well, you might not have thought that Florida recruited better than it did over that period. It's like, well, they've kind of stunk that entire time, so it's like not that surprising. And like their number 1 and number 2 competition in the entire conference is like signing 19 top 100 players in a given class. So like they're kind of in a weird spot there. That's like, yeah, good luck. But seeing Florida on the list was nice, but like also too, when you do the bottom, do you want to do the bottom, Dave? Because I think you get.
Well, I think you get to the bottom of 3-star U, and this is where you go. This is a list of teams where you say, y'all have had a rough decade. There's some exceptions here.
Their average recruits in the 900 to 1,100 range too. Like, okay,
number 1, no surprise, the Kansas Jayhawks. Shout out to Lance Leipold for, I think that's going to turn around in a hurry because I think Kansas has had a uniquely awful last decade. It turned overnight on Mark Mangino, who was 5-0 and in the top 15, and then lost their last 7 games in 2009. I believe maybe that's 2010. And then he never coached there again. And then Turner Gill started them down this road. Charlie Weiss dug them in a deeper hole. David Beatty did his best, but you can't get him out of here.
We're all doing our best, David.
Yeah. Well, not everybody. Let's be honest.
Okay. Charlie Weiss didn't do his best.
Yeah. So
maybe he did. Maybe that was his best.
They've been in a hole. So them being here, there's not one thing or one person that can blame for that. It's a lot of guys. Les Miles didn't help them either there. Iowa State, number 2, very interesting. Iowa State, I thought it would have had a lot more players drafted. They have had some success, not a ton of consistency, but they reach up and bite you. They've had some really good years. Matt Campbell obviously has done a good job, but the draft production has not been there.
I did just before we came on, I did a little Iowa State research because we think Iowa State, Matt Campbell, developing players. So they've had 11 draft picks. This includes 2 stars. In this span, 7 of the 11 have come since 2019. So that tells you that Matt Campbell is that reputation that he has carved out is kind of worthy. They're getting a lot more guys drafted in the last 3 or 4 years than they were in the earlier.
Mitch is out here. I heard you guys like advanced stats. I got some advanced stats to put on your advanced stats.
Well, it's also too, like, you have to keep into account too that like a lot of what we talk about on our podcast and have covered on The Athletic are like 4 years and newer because of but this data goes back a decade, and it can kind of show you too, like how bad it kind of was. Like, to me, like if I were an Iowa State fan, I heard that stat that Mitch just shared, I'd be like, hell yeah. Like that is like a repair of the ailment, but also
they sell that
like a decade is a long time. And mediocrity over the course of a long period kind of stuff. I mean, I just like look at these numbers though, and I just see you have signed as a Power 5 program, 222 players, and you only had 7 drafted. It's like, what's going on there? Like,
well, I could tell you what's going on. It hasn't been great.
yeah. So
number 3, speaking of bright futures, Ari, the Colorado Buffaloes. That is a number. So we didn't really get into this, but I think because of transfers and because so many players that are established and grow themselves and then transfer up or go somewhere else or all these kinds of things with the transfer. This is kind of the last time that I think like we're probably 2 years past this data being, I wouldn't say perfect, but more accurate with the transfers. But like who develops who, like Osiris Torrance, right? He builds himself up at Louisiana.
Yeah,
it's like a 3-star, 2-star guy. He's obviously like a big body. Goes to Florida for a year, and now he's going to be, a second-round pick, something like that. There's going to be a lot of those guys. We've already seen some of them. Jabril Cox did that at North Dakota State, going to LSU. So like LSU doesn't deserve credit for developing that guy. So I think these numbers will get out of whack in the future. Colorado will be interesting. Obviously, a bunch of transfers, but they are number 3 on our worst list, 3.5%. Duke, Washington State, Syracuse, Northwestern, Arizona, Purdue, TCU. TCU, the only school there that's had some big-time success. They've won the Big 12, was it once? Got to the playoff, obviously, last year. Co-champions in 2014. Had some major bowl success. The other thing that stuck out to me, no SEC schools on the bottom 10 of 3-star U.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I don't know if there's been very many SEC schools. Maybe
Vanderbilt was close to this list. I mean, as far as the worst, I could look at. They're probably in the
I wonder how many SEC schools.
You look at the 4-star U. You've got Tennessee. You've got TCU. I mean, you've got Missouri. You've got Texas A&M. 5-star U. Auburn.
I think the answer to this question though is that there aren't very many SEC schools that have come close to signing 200 3-star prospects in a decade.
Yeah.
So so that's like, to me, it's like the higher number of with the 3-star specifically, the higher number of total signed, there's a direct correlation with that to lower quality of 3 too. Because if that is your entire class, then that means that you're probably more likely to have been recruiting in the 1,000 to 1,500 range more so than. Like if Tennessee gets a 3-star prospect, they're probably ranked 650 instead of 1,000. So like that to me, it's like when you have a 3-star, when you sign 200 3-star prospects, you're behind the 8 ball before the game starts. So being bad, I think, is more excusable than if you're really bad at 5 or 4, because you're like beating the odds with high percentages here. But still, I think pretty telling.
Okay, so I went in and everything we've talked about so far has been 3-star, 4-star, 5-star only. I went in and combined the data and tried to come up with my own developmental U, whatever. And I'll just read what I wrote. No program did a better job than Boston College of producing draft picks relative to its recruiting rankings. I've got a spreadsheet with everyone's recruiting rankings over the last 20 years. So
this was an interesting number, Mitch.
Consider the following. The Eagles were 64th out of 65 Power 5 teams, and we're not including the 4 new Power 5 teams.
Who was 65, Mitch?
Kansas State. The Eagles were 64th in average class ranking during this stretch, yet ranked 34th in percent of signees drafted. They had 0 5-stars and only 7 4-stars. Now, here's something that helped them out. Their 2-stars, they had a lot of 2-stars. Those counted in the draft part, but not in the denominator, but not whatever. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've taken real math. So that helped them to a degree. So, but think of that. Their average recruiting ranking was 64th. Their average draft percentage was 34th. I'll turn over to you guys in a second. There were 4 other programs that had at least a 20-spot difference between their average recruiting ranking and percent of signees drafted. 2 on the positive developmental side and 2 on the negative side. Iowa was plus 24, 46th in average class, 22nd in percent drafted. Wisconsin was plus 21 spots higher. The 2 negatives were Tennessee and Texas, which we've talked about. Texas, I know there's a lot of numbers, apologize, but Texas was 7th in average draft class, 35th in percent of guys drafted.
So what you're saying, Mitch, is that Steve Addazio is one of the great coaches of our time.
I'm not saying it. The numbers are saying
just guys being dudes. Hey, Dave, I know that you and I have to play rock, paper, scissors on who gets to write what column. But like, can I just like ask right now in front of everybody? Can I have Texas?
I will, Ari. If I had a sword right now, I would knight you. I will let you talk about your beloved Texas Longhorns and how much they've disappointed you over the last 10 years and caused great physical pain to you and your pet thesis.
Is the headline "They're back" ... to not producing draft picks?
I like honestly want to leave the podcast right now, go to my room, rip off the tarp, turn on the fan, and just start going to work. Like I've got like
You forgot about FaceTiming me while the tarp is off.
I've got like fire coming out of my fucking ears right now. Just like it is like so bad. Like it is like honestly like it is awful. Awful.
Well, I think
Awful.
again, Ari, for as much as this is like, listen, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of reasons, but I do think that for a lot of the Texas stuff, and it I guess you could say chicken or the egg, but continuity has been an issue at Texas. You know, there's a lot of reasons for that. If you let Mac stick around, you don't run Mac out of town. You know, if you say,
you
hey,
can't say that a 5-star prospect can go anywhere and get drafted in the same breath and then say that continuity is their problem.
I'm just saying that is a big reason for why they are where they're at. I think.
And don't try to bring me down with rational thought. I'm going full bore on this stuff.
I think,
I edit his stuff. The rational thought is usually not involved.
Dude, like honestly speaking, like what would be a good like lead for this? Like Arch? Like they just got the most coveted recruit of all time. And it's just like wasn't that big of a surprise because Texas is always good and Texas is always good at recruiting and we always think that they're right around the corner from, but Arch isn't going to save Texas. Like fixing that fucking number is what's going to save Texas.
Like, I think you had some options, right? You didn't have to run Mac out of town, I guess, in theory. You know, Charlie didn't give you a choice. 3 losing seasons in a row, like whatever. Herman was a little bit more complicated. Like, you know, there's a lot of dynamics that were in play there. But Herman had some success. He did some things. They had some, Sam Ehlinger, had a really nice run there. They did have some players. And I just think that continuity is if you do any of the things that I said, if you let Mac stick around for, 3 more years, 4 more years, maybe 10 more years, he's doing pretty well at North Carolina right now. He still had some juice left in him. Or if you let Herman stick around for the last 2 years, are these numbers different? I would say probably slightly better. Am I wrong?
I still think they would be on the bottom list.
Yeah, they wouldn't be good, but they would be slightly better. I don't know that they'd be totally on the bottom. That's an interesting question.
I'm trying to and we don't have to turn this into we've spent this entire feed is already bitching about Texas, but yeah, like that, like every single identifiable metric we have here, they're terrible at it.
Mac got fired for winning 25 games in his last 3 years. That's the most successful 3-year period of Texas football since Tom Herman did that in his last 3 years and also got fired. So I wrote this column like a year or 2 years ago. I think it was talking about the Jim Harbaugh thing at Michigan, that firing a good coach to try and find the great coach backfires like 80% of the time. And that's not to say that you can't aspire for more, that you can't aim for more, but it is just sort of like a careful what you wish for. Our readers can look that column up. I think I wrote that after Michigan beat Ohio State the first time, of like, a lot of people thought they should have fired Harbaugh. If the numbers are different, the money's different, he might have got fired. Instead, he bet on himself, and it has paid off in an unbelievable way for Michigan. I'm just a believer in continuity fixes so many things in college football. I think the quick trigger, I sound like a president of a coaches association right now, but I do believe that a slower trigger can help you fix some of what ails you, because especially with turning over is so hard.
And that's why I just wrote that column.
Yeah,
I wrote the column 2 months ago about how these 10-year guaranteed contracts might actually prove to be smart, because you're taking away the
A&M's going to find out, for better or worse. A&M's going to learn.
Right. Yeah. We could be sitting here in 3 years and A&M's won a national title. I can't believe I'm saying that. And be like, hey,
say it again.
A&M's won a national title. Ari with Britt, she's watching her beloved Aggies. They're at the parade, and
this is the squad right here.
Yeah,
that's it right there.
Sleeping Giant. Well, I mean, they didn't
get a shout out in this, if I recall.
Ubben, you know what? Ari went to his alma mater's rival handpicked their coach for him, put him in place. Now Arizona State's going to take off. He screwed his alma mater.
If you haven't read my story on Kenny Dillingham, by the way, that did just run this week. So interesting stuff there. The youngest coach in college football. I think I think that sort of factors into this somewhat, in that in the transfer portal era, where it's sort of complicated math, that I think you have to have a program that people want to be a part of. I think that's something that Kenny really understands and clearly tries to establish. But you also have to have sort of a mercenary's edge, that some guys are going to leave and you got to go get dudes to replace them. It's easy for guys to leave. The price has never been lower, but it's easier than ever to flip your roster. Obviously, we saw that with Sonny Dykes this year. We've seen that in a handful of other situations. Lincoln Riley, obviously, this year proved that as well, that patience is gone in college football because you can flip your roster in a much faster way. And when you're talking about the big C word, we've been talking about continuity, this whole thing, you got to have a program that people want to be a part of. And I think when you want to succeed in this data and have guys that sign with you and their next step is the draft, I think the old way of doing things is not going to work. I just don't think so. I think, I own you. You do what I say, my way or the highway. It works at Alabama when everybody's getting head coaching jobs and becoming first-round picks. But for the other 60 programs that aren't going to the playoff every year, I think not to let the players run the program, but I think guys want to be heard and valued. And I think that's something that coaches have to stare at themselves. Some coaches are going to have to change. The coaches that adjust, I think, are going to do well in the new era of college football, because none of this data really, I would say, has been impacted by NIL. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, definitely.
Minimal to very little of this, very strongly influenced by NIL. The transfer portal, somewhat immediate eligibility, not really. So this is sort of data from the era of college football that's gone now. So the guys that look like this in 10 years, even though the data will be all screwed up and all that stuff, I think will be the coaches that figure out how to make guys want to be a part of their program, not have to be a part of their program.
Yep. So this has been fun.
That's coaches and players.
And fortunately, we usually don't have hard outs on this, but I'm actually glad we have a hard out where we got to finish, because we could go on forever.
There is no end to this.
Yeah, we could go on forever. We will be talking about this on Stars Matter. We'll have David back on. They'll be talking about another podcast and all this stuff. But
hit us up. We got a mailbag up. We got the comment section. Hit us up. If you got questions, we're going to talk about this more, because it took us a long time to do this data. So we're going to be talking about it and writing about it for a while. So if you got questions, if you want to yell at us, hey, we're here. I think I learned a lot doing this. It's fascinating to look at. It's fascinating because you kind of, I'm very excited for more people to get their eyes on this data and look at it and say, well, what sticks out to them, because you can look at it and one day and then the next day something else jumps out at you, like, oh, well, what about this? And then putting a face on the data is always very interesting too, of like, well, why do we think that happened? Or, where do the numbers lie? Where do the numbers not even tell you how bad or how good it really is? These are all interesting questions.
Yeah, and real quick, and we've talked about this. We know this is not perfect. There's you can look at it and poke some holes in the methodology on the front end or the back end, but our thinking was it averaged out. So if we missed a guy in the front end for some reason,
there's no
the
clean
back
way
end,
because of the draft eligibility rules. There's no
in the red
clean
shirt,
way to say that. So there might be some 07, 08 guys that are draft picks that didn't get counted, but there's probably some 19 guys that haven't been drafted yet, especially with the COVID year. So that was our thought, is that there's no clean way to cut it off. So we're just going to do an 11-year window and an 11-year window, and it'll be close.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to Stars Matter. We will be back next week or earlier. I've got my Ari problem here about when we're actually recording and when this is going to come on. We will be back later this week on our normal edition of Stars Matter. Thanks for listening, everybody.